Welcome to Watermark's Church Leadership Podcast, conversation with church leaders for church leaders. And I'm your host, John McGee. Well, hey friends, welcome back. Joined in the studio today by Caitlin Van Wagoner, Executive Director of Communications. Always a fan favorite. Caitlin, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, John. I'm so excited to be here.
So today we're going to talk about a topic that really no one wants to think about until I think it's all they think about. And so it's crisis communications, media relations, all those types of things. Caitlin has led us so well in this area, and I'm really excited for you to get to learn from her. So I think, Caitlin, the best way to kind of run this episode is for me to kind of keep my elbows close, let you talk as much as you want to about each one of these topics. And I think it's going to be really, really helpful to the audience. So before we hit record, you said you didn't have to practice this for the first 9 days that you were on staff.
Yes, I did make it 9 days without needing a single crisis communication skill. And then I hit day 10. So this is the podcast I hope none of you have to use, but you probably will. And as you said, John, it's not a super fun thing to think about. I wish I had thought about it a little bit more. So let's start with a story. The year was 2016. I believe I had an iPhone 6S, just to take you back in time. TikTok didn't exist.
I love the level of detail.
Yes, I think I needed to paint a picture.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So we are 10 days into staff, and I had come on staff at Watermark from an advertising firm, so no PR background. No communications real background, so strict advertising. I'm in my apartment, having just kind of figured out where the break room was at Watermark. And I looked down on my phone, and someone had sent me a post from Facebook, which was the reigning social media platform of the time. Still is to some people. And the post was about Watermark. It contained some misinformation about Watermark, and it had thousands of shares. It had exploded overnight. And I had no idea what to do, but I knew I was probably going to have to do something. And I'm kind of glad I didn't know what I was in store for. But after that came this deluge of, first it started with, our longtime members calling and texting us and our elders, asking what's going on. Lots of people calling our front desk. Then the media calls started coming in. People wanted interviews. We were worried about protesters happening. And it all kind of crescendoed over the next several weeks of media interviews that we did. We picked and chose which ones we were going to do. And it all kind of crescendoed in a dueling op-ed we ran on the Sunday morning edition of the Dallas Morning News, our paper of record, sharing our perspective on the situation and the alternate perspective on the situation from the person involved. And that was kind of the crescendo, but that was all within my first 3 to 4 weeks on staff, was trying to figure out how to navigate that. And I tell you that story because I think we were, by God's grace, able to navigate that situation in a way that I think built trust with our members. And I can take no credit for it because, as I mentioned, I had absolutely no experience. I really do think the Holy Spirit led us through that. It was truly His grace that led us through that and gave us the right opportunities and the right media context to be able to do that and lead it in that way. But I tell you that because this is really important. Yeah. And it's probably going to happen to your church. Maybe not at that level. I hope not at that level. Yeah. But I wish I had known some of these principles early on. I wish I'd known some of these principles coming into this job.
Oh, that's a great place to start. So yeah, you did handle that incredibly well, and you've continued to handle that well. And like you said, not all opportunities are created equal.
Yes.
Not all moments are equal in the life of a church, and these are really, really important. And if you get them right, by God's grace, they actually could, make trust deposits with the people that you lead, if it's done well. So, Caitlin, let's, I don't want to be too elementary, but let's talk about what a crisis even is. So you gave that one, that example of a post that goes viral, but what else is in your head when you think about this topic?
So that can be a big, scary word, and you can almost feel like it has to be this big thing for it to be called a crisis, but there can be a spectrum. So I would say I've used the skills we're going to talk through in a variety of situations. So everything from a key leader resigning, to changes in our organizational structure, a social media post that's critical or damaging, a high-profile funeral. So we've had several of those at Watermark when I've had to employ some of these skills. That's not really a crisis, but it is a way. A natural disaster or a pandemic, potentially. I think a lot of us have done that. News outlets publishing something. So it can be a variety of things, but the actual definition, the working definition that I use of a crisis is this. It is an unexpected event or situation that threatens your organization's functionality or trust, i.e. when your reputation is at stake. And it's kind of a shape of a crisis. There are some elements in play that when one of those or a couple of those elements are in play, I know we're probably in a crisis. So there is some sense of urgency, there is some sense of uncertainty, there's potential for harm, and there is a sense of heightened scrutiny. So there's kind of the spidey sense that we're getting more questions than we normally would about a thing, or maybe you're getting calls from reporters. But if those four things are in place or amplifying, urgency, uncertainty, potential for harm, and a sense of heightened scrutiny, I know we might be approaching a crisis.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, and from my perspective, you've done a great job just kind of scanning the horizon for things that would kind of meet those litmus tests, and which I think is really part of your job. And I do think a church should have someone that is their job. And then also just making sure that the staff and key leaders all feel a sense of responsibility, because not everyone is on every platform. Not everyone is in every room.
Absolutely.
And, so when I see something, I always just send it to you. It's like,
yes,
are you on this? Are you aware? And, almost always you're like, yep, I'm on it. We've got it. We're working on a plan.
Yes. And I always appreciate that. I get those texts all the time, and a lot of times they're not new information, but occasionally they are. Yeah. And so making sure your staff feels empowered to just share information.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Well, let's talk about, let's say, we are in the middle of one of those things, and let's just think before we talk about real tactical things, let's talk about just kind of operating principles.
Okay.
And like, how should we even think about that?
Okay. The first operating principle I want you to think about is there is a difference between, and this is a little bit strategy talk. Is that okay, John? Can I start there?
That's the thing. People don't know about you. They think you're only comms.
They think I am.
But I will tell the audience this before if we make any major strategy shift on some of the things that I'm working on, you're one of the very few doors that I make sure
thanks, Sean.
I knock on. So yeah, you're quite well versed in strategy. So let's start there.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about brand theory. So there is a difference between your brand and your reputation. Okay. So your brand is how you present yourself to your audience or your members if you're a church. Your reputation is how your audience perceives your actions. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Brand versus reputation. Okay, I got some good news and some bad news about that. The good news the bad news rather, is that your audience controls your reputation. It is outside of the locus of control. The good news is that your actions, especially during a crisis, can really influence their perception of your reputation. So it's really important, because I think churches or organizations in general think they control their reputation. That is in the hands of your members, but how you react in a crisis dramatically impacts that. And here is the even better news is that God is sovereign and he controls your reputation.
Yeah.
You can trust him. And so my favorite verse when it comes to crisis communication is Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. The Holy Spirit has led Watermark through every single crisis, and he can lead you through a crisis at your church if you invite him into it.
Yeah, that's right. And I actually, it's interesting you would use that verse. I actually remember someone, at one of those publications that we'll leave it at there, that was very, very critical, and it ended up because of the way it was handled, I don't know if they were a raving fan, but they do feel like God turned their heart, and that was really, really fun to see.
Yeah, it was. That's happened a couple of times, which is really neat. So not always, it can be an absolute win. So behind every reporter is a real human being, which we'll talk about in a bit. So that's important to know.
Good.
Okay, another operating principle is know the difference between smoke and fire. So what do I mean by that? So smoke is what I call a minor disturbance that could flare up or it could go away. So that's an example is a post on social media with its negative comments about your organization, but it's not really getting a lot of traction, but I'm watching it, right? Then there's fire. That is when minor disturbances turn into major threats. So that post has now become viral. So the example that I told you before, when I looked down and that post had hundreds of thousands of shares, that was a fire.
Yeah.
That was not smoke.
Welcome to staff. That's amazing.
Yes. And so that could have escalated. I wish I had seen it before. I just maybe wasn't monitoring, truly. So you want to monitor and prepare at smoke, but activate at fire.
Okay.
Another operating principle when it comes to crisis communication is you want to respond, not react. Take a moment to really lead yourself well, to get the full picture of what is going on, to pray, to seek counsel, to really get yourself, we're going to talk about this when we get into tactics, get into the crisis communication headspace. But the principle there is you respond, you don't react. Next, it's going to feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because while I'm saying you want to respond and react, the other side of that is that speed really matters in crisis communication responses. So while you do want to gather all the facts, you want to act fast, but you want to think really carefully when it comes to a crisis, especially if reporters or social media is involved. Reporters work on a 24-hour news cycle. They have bosses called editors who often drive their deadlines and who do not really care what our internal deadline is for different things. So you want speed really, really matters when it comes to that. A next operating principle that's really important, a concept that we'll talk through, is the 80-20 rule. So the 80-20 rule is you want to focus 80% of your efforts on the public that is reasonable. So those could still be critical of you, but they are reasonable to hear the facts that as you present them and to engage with you logically. You do not want to focus on the 20% of your audience that will absolutely never be persuaded.
Yep. And
And those people exist, and they'll never, no matter what you say, they'll never be persuaded. But here's the issue. That 20% is the most vocal.
Yep.
They're the ones probably writing you the emails or posting on social media or commenting, but you want to remember that just because you're seeing that and it's really loud doesn't mean they represent the 80% of people who are reasonable, and if you present your case, will respond logically.
It's good.
That's
Really
the
good.
80-20 rule.
Really good. Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The next operating principle, divulge with discernment. So the universal rule of crises, especially inside the church, and this is not critical of the church, this is just my experience, is that everyone thinks they deserve to know everything.
Yes.
And that's so tough, especially when you're in a church that is also a church family. I get it. I so get that. But the issue is deciding who gets to know what level of detail when, what is appropriate and helpful, is a really difficult dance that should be done thoughtfully and with a lot of prayer. But that is important. You can't just there are two pendulum swings that I see churches, which is they don't divulge nearly enough information. They keep it too tight-lipped, or they divulge everything. Those are probably two extremes that you don't want to be in. You want to figure out what is the appropriate level of communication and detail for what circle. And you can't be pushed around to one side of that pendulum. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
It's really good.
You want to be, and I think this goes without saying, you want to be authentic, transparent, and discerning, but you should never lie. Ever, ever lie. And also, legally, there are things that you cannot disclose without opening your organization up to more risk. So it's really important when you're going about things to make sure you involve a lawyer just to give you counsel. There might be rules in place that you inside in your state that you actually are opening your organization up to risk when you're trying to be authentic. So you just want to bring a lawyer in, maybe someone from your body who's an attorney, to help you process through that, to understand the implications of the amount of information
That's good.
that you are thinking about.
What's an example of that?
Employment law.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of churches talk through their employment law differs from state to state. And so talking about maybe why an employee was fired, what level, you want to be really careful about that because from state to state, it can differ. Or just like there might be, if there's an open legal case, the church divulging details might actually work against a legal case. So you just want to be really careful about that if there is anything there. And so I would just run it through, not out of fear, but truly out of, you could cause more damage than you actually intend to if you don't involve an attorney. Does that make sense?
That's really good. Yeah.
Okay,
Really
great.
helpful. Really helpful.
The other thing is clarity, is kindness. You want to relentlessly pursue really clear language. Now, I love pastors. I love being led by pastors, but during a crisis is often not the exact right time to use really dense theological language or Christianese, or honestly, it might not be the time. It's a time to lead for sure, and you operate out of biblical principles, but it is not necessarily the time to shepherd individual hearts. Because a lot of the times people reading your crisis communications are members of the public who might not understand that, and that can feel really confusing or even kind of add to an air of mystery. So I always say it straight and then say it great. relentlessly pursue really clear language. You can lead and show empathy and operate out of biblical principles, but you want to make your language as plain spoken as possible.
It's really good. Yeah, this isn't the time for showing off your incredible Hebrew knowledge for some obscure.
It is not. It is not that time.
Obscure passage in the Old Testament. Yes.
There is a time for that. There is a time for that. Is before or after.
This would not be one. Yeah.
Yes, and that doesn't mean you don't you're still are in a. I think you're still leading in a crisis. You're still operating out of principles and values, but it's not that time.
Just be clear. Yeah.
Yes. The next operating principle is the best time to prepare for a crisis is before it actually occurs. So the fact that you are listening to this podcast means you are further ahead than I was. So congratulations. So I think, and that can look like just starting to put together some plans for who's going to respond in what way, running through some scenarios in your head. Do you have the right players in place to be able to respond? That's where I would start. But the best time to prepare is before it's on your doorstep, because it probably will be on your doorstep at the most inconvenient time possible.
That's right. It will not check with your assistant and see if this is a good
Truly.
week. Yes. Okay. Caitlin, those are amazing. I mean, I feel like we could stop there, but if we could we talk about just kind of what it would look like then to put a plan together? So those are great principles. I feel like you've kind of like framed the house, and let's just build it out a little bit. So one of these things happens. How do you put together a plan in the midst of that?
Let's go step by step, shall we?
Great.
Okay, let's build a plan together. So something's going on, right? We can, maybe it's that social media post that's getting a few critical comments, right? Your first thing is to actually determine, and this can be a harder question than you think it is, am I in a crisis? So you want to determine, is this smoke or is this fire? And I know that's a silly analogy, but I do think it's helpful. I use it all the time. You don't want to over or under activate. So you don't want to go all out and bring the full force of your communications team to bear when it really is this small thing that's going to fizzle out. And you also don't want to ignore it. So I always pay attention at smoke, and I get myself ready to activate for when it might turn to fire.
Yeah.
But the first step is determining, am I in a crisis?
Okay. What, let's say you are, then what?
I am in a crisis. Okay, great. The next is you want to get into what I call my crisis headspace. And I don't know if this is real. I've not read this in any book. I've gone through some crisis communication training. It's about to be real. Okay. But I call it my crisis headspace. And this is so silly. I physically put on my crisis communication hat. You can't see me, but I'm putting on an air hat on my head.
It's got a big A on it. Yep.
Because I tend to be a pretty reactive person, I need to do something physically to remind myself that I have to act differently in this situation because my organization and the rooms I'm about to walk into are going to demand that. So I shift my thinking to try to see what's happening to me, and then also to be able to see the opportunity that exists here. So I try to keep calm. I try to pray, breathe. So sometimes I'll do box breathing if my heart rate gets really elevated. I wear essentially a smart ring and a smart watch, and sometimes I'll look at it and I'll be like, oh my gosh, my heart rate is out of control, and I take a moment to breathe.
Good.
And then you have a choice to make. Especially if you're a crisis communications person who's going to be leading this, or a pastor who's going to be leading this, you have a choice to make about what type of energy you're going to bring to your staff and in the rooms. Are you going to be a thermostat? Or are you going to be a thermometer, right? Are you going to set the temperature, or are you just going to react to it and maybe even heat it up? You have a choice to be a stress de-amplifier and somebody that can help the organization to communicate clearly. But if you're if you're the communications person in the room and you're stressed, everyone else will be stressed. It's like, I can be stressed in other rooms when other things are being discussed and it's not that big of a deal. If I'm stressed in a crisis, I mean, everyone else is stressed, right? So you have to choose to be a stress de-amplifier in that moment. So get in your crisis communication headspace.
I love it. Yeah, we've actually talked about that multiple times on our podcast, but yes, everyone is going to take their cues from you. And even if your heart rate is through the roof, even if you're not sure what your next 3 moves are, just projecting calm. Mm-hmm. It's contagious.
Absolutely.
It's contagious.
Absolutely.
And then everyone else gets to use their entire, brain all the way to the frontal lobes and not just freak out. And so don't underestimate that. Learn how you respond internally.
Absolutely.
I love that. You're like, hey, this is what I know I'm out of bounds, and this is what I do to bring it back. Like, don't just think about what you're opening line in an email. Don't get good at that. Also get good at leading yourself. So really, really good. What else? So we've kind of let ourselves, we are in a crisis. We've let ourselves well.
You might be tempted to start reacting.
Okay.
That's not the time. You
Okay.
want to zoom out a little bit. So you want to start thinking at a more macro level about what could be going on here and what could be at stake. So some 2 questions that I'm going to pursue when you zoom out. The first is you want to define reality. What is actually happening? So I am not a trained detective. I have watched Psych several times.
You're funny and,
Yeah,
kind of
I have
curious.
watched,
Yeah.
I don't know what other teenage detective shows I'm sure I watched or read when I was little. So that's my extent of my training. I often have to play detective to figure out what really happened. And honestly, even well-meaning staff members only bring me often part of the story. The proverb that is really important here that I think is Proverbs 18:17. The one who states his case first seems right until another comes along and examines him. So you have to be really sure that you have the facts straight. I often check with multiple sources from multiple different parts of the organization to ensure, hey, I have a very clear understanding of the facts at stake. So that's the first one, is you zoom out to define reality. Don't assume the first case presented to you is correct, even if it's by well-meaning people that you love and trust.
That's good.
The second thing you want to define is, what is the opportunity here? There is an opportunity with every single crisis. There is a gift in a crisis, and that gift is that it gives you a stage and a platform to really demonstrate your organizational values. So you want to zoom out and answer these kind of questions. What is the most significant risk here? It's not that the social media post blows up and goes viral and people think mean things about us. The thing at risk here is that potentially your members could erode trust with your organization. That's a significant risk, right? Then there's also, you want to ask yourself, what's the opportunity here? What could be true about us? What if this was true about us at the end? What if we actually, in leading through this became true about our organization? We reinforced this. So define reality, define what's at risk, and then define what the opportunity here. And if you can figure out a way to get yourself to see the opportunity in a crisis, that is the ball game. Like, we can stop the podcast here. That's what you need to know, is if you can figure out how to lead yourself, to calm yourself, to really see clearly enough to figure out the opportunity and lead towards that opportunity, that's when a crisis can really be a gift.
Good. So I'm buying what you're selling. Can you give me an example of, in real time, something hits your radar and you're able to kind of see the opportunity that's in that?
I think I do. So if we go back to that original story in 2016, I said a member had posted something with misinformation, and it largely had to do with what it looked like and what the requirements were to be a member at Watermark. That was I won't go into too much detail, but that was kind of the gist of it. And so the opportunity there is, rather than just to defend ourselves, to actually clarify what we believe membership means at a church, what we think the calling of an elder is, what meaningful membership is. So it was actually to reinforce an organizational value of meaningful membership and pastoral shepherding. So there was an opportunity there to clarify who we were, why that was an important value to us, not just correct the information as it was.
That's a
Does that
great,
help?
yeah, perfect.
Okay.
It's so helpful. Yes. Okay.
Okay, great.
What else in terms of putting together a plan and taking steps?
So once you kind of thought critically, you've zoomed out, we've calmed down, we're in a great space, we're in a great headspace. Then you want to define the teams, because there are lots of people in play that all need to be coordinated. And there are kind of 3 buckets of different teams. The first is the crisis managers. So those are the leaders that are actually responsible for how your organization responds. They're the ones making the operational calls for how to respond to a crisis. That can be your elder, your staff leadership. That's where a legal advisor could come into play. If it involves a specific department like security or kids ministry or student ministry, you need to have a representative there. Outside experts if you need that, but it's the team, kind of a small sub-team of crisis managers. And now those are different than your crisis communications team. So your crisis communications team is your second team. And that is the communications team that's responsible for communicating about the crisis. Okay, a couple of pro tips there. So those are the first two teams, crisis managers and crisis communicators. What I often see is people try to make that the same team. They make the crisis communicators in charge for making the organizational calls for how to deal with it, or vice versa. Those two teams need to be separate and to respect one another and get input from one another. The crisis communicator, maybe the lead spokesperson is on that crisis management team, but don't ask your communications team how to make operational decisions and vice versa. And don't ask your crisis manager team how to respond. Those two teams should be separate, but should work in tandem and should deeply respect and champion one another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really good.
The other thing you want to do is make sure everyone in your organization knows who the designated spokesperson for the organization is.
Good.
And more specifically, that they are not it. And so you can have some very well-meaning staff. This has happened at Watermark before. Some very well-meaning staff who think it is their job because we're a high ownership mentality. And we have staff that really love to activate, and they think it is their job, and this well-meaning and well-intentioned, to answer a reporter's call when they call them, or to jump in on social media and come to the defense of Watermark or correct misinformation. And maybe they're trying to do it, and it's really well-meaning, but that people confuse that because they have a Watermark email address for an official statement. And so you just want to be really clear with your staff in a really kind way. Hey, your role is to pray and help us get information, but your role is not to respond or communicate unless you've been given talking points or things like that to communicate with your people about.
That's good. Yeah. Their response is, when asked, hey, I think probably the most helpful thing would be for you to contact this person. Yes. But that's a step that gets skipped. So if you're not in a crisis, you should be thinking through for your organization, who is our spokesperson? That's typically a communications person, or the lead pastor can be that person, but it needs to be a single person, and everyone on your staff team needs to know it. So good.
Okay. So the three teams, we've talked about crisis managers, we've talked about crisis communicators. The next one is an often overlooked team, and they are the front lines of the people that are actually getting the questions inside your church. And so often I think the crisis management team and the crisis communications team can sit in their ivory tower and they can write things on their computers, but there are a whole group of people that are actually with the members, right? On Sundays, they're the ones that are the greeters who are getting, or at the welcome desk who are getting questions, right? Mm-hmm. They are maybe your small group leaders who are getting questions from their members. One of the most important people in a crisis response is your front desk receptionist who are fielding. So you need to make sure those people feel informed, empowered, like they're not out on an island, so that when they get a question, they can say, you know what, I'm going to direct your question to this. Or maybe there is some clarity you can give to your staff and empower them to, say, hey, actually, here's the information I know about this. Or, you give your staff a statement or a little paragraph or whatever, and they can help you communicate that. But there's an often overlooked group of people that I just call people on the front lines of answering questions. And you need to make sure that you're really also caring for them if they're rattled or getting a lot of questions. That's a really difficult spot for example, your small group leaders to be in.
Yeah, that's good. That's really, really good. Yeah.
The next part after you have defined the team for who is responding is you want to define the audience. So who do you care most about communicating and reaching? Now that is where that 80-20 rule really comes into play. Who are the people that you want to focus your communication and messaging around? And that's probably different from crisis to crisis. For us, that is typically our members. So we primarily focus on our members, and then our attenders, and then our partners inside the city who we have really strategic partners with. That is who we focus our time and energy on communicating with. Now, we do that often in a public way so that the watching world can get that information as well. But we care most often about communicating with our members. So you want to define your audience. Your 80-20 rule is very much in place there. The next is you want to define your North Star. So what's the win, right? Envision a future. What is organizational values are going to guide us here? If you have organization core values or scripture that you really feel like are in play, what is going to be the win? What do we want to be true about us when this is all over? So define the win before you've even started communicating. That will really help you guide you as you start to create communication.
That's really good. I like that. There's something about reading a statement, and then there's something about saying, hey, one of our core values is X.
Yes.
And we say this is what we say when we mention this core value.
Absolutely.
This is what so right now we're going to actually live this out, or we're going to
Absolutely.
practice this, or this is going to inform it. I think that is a really, really pro tip.
Yes.
Really, really good.
And it elevates your statement from just being can feel like jargon.
Yeah.
Or messaging that feels really corporate to go, no, you're allowed to, you want to be a church. You want to operate out of who you are. Don't try to be some corporate communications person in a crisis. Be who you are. You might still have to be clear and maybe less Christianese, use less Christian language, but you still are a Christian. You should operate out of Christian values.
Correct.
If that's helpful. The next thing you want to do after is define your message. What is the singular thought or idea we're trying to convey? You want to root that message in facts. Again, never lie, but consider what level of detail is most helpful in that moment. And again, what we said, what organizational values do we want to actually reinforce with our message? But what's the singular idea in every piece of communication we want to reiterate or reinforce as we go through our crisis?
That's good.
Next is you want to figure out, okay, we've got our message. Where do we want to put that out on? So what channels do we want to use to communicate? That's often based on who your audience is. So for example, for us, we often, when we're communicating during a crisis, we'll post something to our website and then we will email it to our members. So it's posted to our website, the public can see it, but we've emailed it to our members specifically so that before, maybe we've even released the statement to the media, that would come after we have released it to our members so that our members have gotten that communication first, but the public can still see it because we want to be authentic and transparent. I probably wouldn't post that statement on social media because, again, I want to prioritize communicating with our members. Now, that's very generalized. I might make a different call based on the specific crisis, but that's typically who and how I would prioritize communicating with.
Yeah. So if it pertained to the family, to the church,
yes.
This is kind of, it would be if we were a biological family, this would be a family matter. You would email them, and you wouldn't feel the need to go blast it on
absolutely not
on the socials. Yeah,
but I would make it publicly available so that people feel if they have questions, they can go and get it, or if a member of the media wants to see it, they can see it really clearly. Yeah, so I would do that.
Good.
And then the next is you kind of pray and press send. Which sounds a little silly. You activate your crisis communication plan, which is a step because I think sometimes you get so log jammed in wanting to get something really perfect, it slows you down. But remember that speed matters. And so an axiom in crisis communication is that a good answer now is better than a perfect answer later. And so while you want to be true and you want to think really carefully about your messaging, if you are being slowed down significantly, remember that reporters are on deadlines and the rumor mill is real, and members with questions that causes anxiety and concern in them. So there is a time to just press send, and then you activate and you monitor. And if you need to correct something you said, you can do that. You can apologize and own it or correct it later. We'll talk about some tools in place to help you kind of correct statements or issue statements, but you just at some point have to activate and then you just monitor it. It's not done once you send the press release or you send the statement. You have to monitor to see how are people receiving it? What feedback are you getting? Did you actually leave out a piece of information that would be really helpful to clarify? Is a piece of language that you used unclear? You can go in and correct that, right? So you shouldn't just press send and walk away. You want to press send and monitor it and keep going until the crisis is over.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so that would apply both to the press and then also internally.
Absolutely.
If, after the fact, you had a member meeting and you got the same question 15 times. That probably wasn't clear. Next time you get up, you just say, "Hey, we got this question a lot. We weren't as clear as we could have been. This is what we mean by X."
Ask people, members you trust, to give you critical feedback and believe them.
Yeah.
Right? It can sometimes, especially if you're tired in a crisis, you can go, I've put so much work into it. I just want it to be done. And it's like, hey, if somebody that you really trust is giving you critical feedback, you need to listen to it. If they're in that, 80% that you really trust, and I would listen to it. But I rarely get it perfect on the first try. I'll say that. And so I often have to revise it or issue a second thing or things like that. That's really common. And that actually brings me to a really practical tool to help you do this.
Please.
So a really practical tool, which is my best friend now, and I wish I had discovered it 9 years ago. It's called a holding statement. And a holding statement is, you can look them up online for examples. There's plenty of examples online. It's not rocket science, but it is a really brief statement, typically 4 to 5 sentences long. and it's prepared in a communication and it's revised often that describes the state of where we are and where we're going. And there's kind of a formula to it that will help flesh out what a holding statement is. Again, it's typically 4 to 5 sentences, written really quickly and revised often, but it acknowledges what happens. It expresses concern or empathy. It gives the current status of the crisis that you're in, what actions you're being taken, and then it reinforces that main message or that main value. So 5 things: acknowledgement, concern or empathy, current status, the actions being taken, and the reinforcement of your main message. And it's 4 to 5 sentences. And as soon as there's smoke, I start that sucker. Right? I have a lot of holding statements that I have never released that I start in case it catches.
That's what you do for fun. You just kind of
I just sit at home.
Some people knit.
Some people knit. I write holding statements.
Okay.
No, I have a ton that are saved on my computer that I've never had to release because it's fizzled out.
Yeah.
But that's the process. You're getting yourself into that headspace of, hey, there's something going on. So I'm starting to get the facts. I'm starting to zoom out and see, hey, what could be at play? What do I want to be true? And then you can release. It also puts you in a position to when it catches fire, you can release that holding statement. It puts you in a position to respond really, really quickly. It puts you in a position to get organizational alignment on your messaging. So I would never release a holding statement without my crisis management team completely signing off on that and saying, this is true. This is the message we want to send. But you don't have to overthink it. It doesn't necessarily, sometimes a whole pastoral letter is necessary, but oftentimes it's 4 to 5 sentences. Don't overthink it. It's those 5 things. And you can find a ton of examples on the internet that all follow this formula. This is a pretty well-known formula for a holding statement. So I would start that process immediately when you kind of start to smell smoke.
That's good. That's really, really helpful. And now that you say that, I didn't know what to call it, but now
it's called a holding statement.
Yeah, I go, oh,
yes.
I've seen that.
Yeah, you have seen it. Yeah. You might have even been doing it and you didn't know what it was, but that's a tool that I wish I discovered sooner.
That's good. Okay. What any other just kind of tactics? So once this thing is now happening, you've issued a holding statement, any just kind of tactical things you could share?
Sure, absolutely. So I've got a couple of things I get questions about a lot. One of them is apologies. So here's what I have to say is that organizations make mistakes just like humans do. And if you blew it, you need to own it and you need to own it fully. The saying is the cover up is often worse than the crime, and that holds true. It's also an opportunity to model humility and accountability. So I would take accountability if you have owned it. Ask for forgiveness and demonstrate ways you're going to change to move forward. But I would not, avoid saying the words, "I'm sorry, will you forgive us?" or taking accountability. I think that's a great way if your organization's made a mistake you can build trust by owning an apology.
That's really, really good. Okay. Hey, Kayla, can we go back to just kind of the whole social media, comment moderation, how we should think about that?
Comments on social media can get out of control so quickly.
Yes.
So a couple of the ways that we think about social media, especially comments on our posts. Your social media feed is your space, and you are entitled to kind of patrol that space. But I try to be really careful about deleting posts. I'm totally okay if people post things that are critical or comments of me that are critical if I think that they fall into that 80% of reasonable people. There are reasonable people out there that could be critical of me. You know what? They might be right. So I'm not going to delete every single thing that is critical if I feel like it is reasonable.
So so that's you personally.
For our organization.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
Yes. On behalf of Watermark. That's how I counsel my social media team. Now I do feel comfortable deleting those posts in that 20% if they are vitriolic, if they use bad language. So I don't hesitate to do that, but discerning that is difficult. You want to do that with prayer. But I think that's the way I think about it. I'm hesitant to delete it, but I'm also not afraid if they are vitriolic or something like that, or it's overly heated in nature.
It's good. Really good.
But if they have a thoughtful criticism, I'll retain it, and I will often respond publicly to that and move the conversation into offline. So I'll say something like, if you pose a a question to us on our social media page, I'll respond and I'll say, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak with you about this. Will you DM us so that we can get coffee or set up a phone call?
Yeah. So way tactical, but do you do that from your personal account? Does it just show up as a generic Watermark account?
It could show up as the generic Watermark account, or you could say something like, hey, this is Sarah, our Watermark social media account manager. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to respond to this. I would love to have a conversation with you. Will you DM us your phone number so we can get a call set up?
Great.
I would not try to moderate that in the comments ever. Like I would never try to moderate an argument in the comments section. Okay. That's always better for an offline situation. But I do comment publicly so that the watching world can see that I have addressed it. I'm not ignoring it.
That's good. That's really, really good. Yeah, it's amazing sometimes. Not everybody, but it's amazing sometimes if you just sit down with someone and listen. Just listen. That a lot of times people just want to be heard, and some of the vitriol that you talked about, or some of those things will just dissipate just by a conversation and listening.
Well, also there's a lot of keyboard warriors out there who would love to leave really mean, hateful, vitriolic comments, and when you ask to get a cup of coffee with them, or for them to get on the phone, they just don't take you up on it. And so, which is kind of disappointing. I think as ministers of the gospel of reconciliation, we should not be opposed at all. We should lean into those opportunities. One of my favorite things, I'm going to brag on my social media manager, Sarah, really quickly. So we had an incident where we were getting trolled. This was within the last year. On every comment, on every post we were making was getting trolled with comments, with misinformation that were getting really heated. And so we knew we were going to delete, and we were in this process of we were issuing a statement, so responding to those comments to either point them to an offline conversation or to the statement. But there were some that we deleted, and some that just were really heartbreaking. And so what she did is she printed off, she took notes of the name, the first name, the content of what they were sharing. If it's like they had if there was any personal story they had shared in that, she printed that off and she put 30 minutes on my calendar, on our team's calendar, and we sat down, we prayed. For every single person that had written some really difficult, really honestly like mean things about us on our social media page. And I loved that. Like the heart is we still want to pray. Those are people too, yeah. But that doesn't mean you have to essentially retain their vitriol, right? If it's being spewed at you.
Yep.
That's what I would say. So that was just want to brag on my social media manager,
I love that.
Sarah,
I love that.
Who's really thoughtful, who tries to be really thoughtful and prayerful about comment moderation because it's really important.
Yeah. Back to your comment. Hey, stay Christian.
Stay Christian. Yes.
We don't sideline our faith here. Okay.
We don't sideline our faith.
This is one, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone talk to church leaders about, but just working with reporters.
Absolutely.
Someone calls, the local affiliate calls you.
That used to really scare me.
Sure.
So just to be really, if you kind of like get a phone call from a reporter, I was so foreign to this world, I would start to get really nervous. So reporters are people too. They have jobs to do. And it is one of the best things I've done as a communications professional is to work to understand the job of a reporter and specifically what they're trying to get a quote on, what their deadline is, and what types of stories they've written in the past. So I get a request from a reporter, and my first thing I do is I vet that reporter. I don't revet the request, I revet the reporter. What publication are they from? Have they written about something similar in the past? What is their specific line of questioning? And then I always ask, what is the deadline? Because sometimes you get the request and you're like, I'll get to it in a few days, and the reporters actually go into press that night or the next day, and you've missed your opportunity. That also comes to, I don't believe in saying no comment. That used to be something that I was comfortable with. I think as I was learning this space, I typically want to make some sort of comment, but I don't say no comment. And so I almost always, now I've broken that rule a few times, but I almost always provide a comment, especially it's from a reputable news source.
Okay.
So the other thing to think about as a reporter is they absolutely have a job to do, but as a communications professional, their goals and my goals don't always align. And that's okay, because my goal is to use the reporter as a mechanism for my message. And so that's why it's really important to define what message you want to communicate in your holding statement. And I stick to that exclusively. Now, if they keep doubling down on other things, find a way to bridge back to your main message. But I am looking at when you look at a reporter, like picture a megaphone in place of their head, and that megaphone is for your message and the message of your church. And then that's to reiterate the importance and value of a holding statement. Because if you have that ready and you get a call from a reporter, this has happened to me recently, you get a call from a reporter and they say, hey, I've got a deadline in 3 hours. You are now in a position to respond clearly and with your message to that reporter. And if you respond, they will likely print it. Right? If you give them a good faith response, more often than not, they will print your response. A lot of them are ethically bound to. And so I would say like that's why a holding statement puts you in a really solid position.
Goodness, man. I feel like I got a master's level education on all things crisis management. Anything else that you think would be helpful to church leaders, to pastors, people who do what you do, Caitlin, in churches, nonprofits, those types of things? The
only thing I would say is, yes, I think I've literally given you a 10-step process or a 9 to 10-step process, and that does exist for sure. And these are pretty general steps, but it's mostly about just doing the next right thing.
Yeah,
like just be, and it's gonna feel like a risk. You might feel nauseous when you email that statement out to the press. That's totally fine. But it is about doing the next right thing, listening to the Spirit of God in you. Is he giving you peace? Is the Spirit of God giving you peace about the message you're going to communicate? If you have a check in your spirit, listen to that check.
Yeah.
If you don't, it is a risk for sure to step into the public eye, especially if you're not used to it. You've just got to do the next right thing. So one of my favorite verses when it comes to crisis communications is Matthew 10:16. I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. Mm-hmm. The concept that you want to be wise, but you also want to be faithful. And so you've got to balance those two things. And if you make a mistake, own it. Just own it. Don't try to hide it. And keep moving forward. You'll learn a lot. I've done so much wrong in this space. I look back at how I first handled it with no training, and I am just like, oh my gosh, really, God was really kind to get us through that with me at the helm. So You can do this. Just do the next right thing.
I love it. Wise, humble, and faithful. Those are 3 good places to end there. Do the next wise thing. Trust God. He is the head of the church. Christ is the head of the church. And so the head will be with you as you try to lead the church, interact with the community well. And I will say, friends, you will be misunderstood. And you're going to have to grow in your ability to be misunderstood and know, hey, you know what? God knows. Mm-hmm. We've done the best we can, and we're going to go to bed, and we're just going to trust him. We're going to trust the head of the church, and we're going to sleep well. But that will be a muscle that we'll have to grow. Mm-hmm. It's no fun. Today I was misunderstood about something, and I just thought everything in me would just wanted to explain it to the nth degree, and I just said, I'll just be okay. But it's not. I'm not 100% okay. You never will be. Mm-hmm. But trust the head of the church and do the best you can. So, Caitlin, thank you so much, friend. This was fantastic. And I think it's going to be really, really helpful to church leaders. So thank you for what you do around here. You are a star, and that Caitlin's role is communications, but she adds value. Great leaders add value across all types of areas and lanes, and you, friend, are a big part of all that's good around here. So thank you. So friends, if you have any questions or comments about this episode, any other episodes, if you got ideas for future episodes, you can always reach us at clp@watermark.org. That's clp@watermark.org. We'll talk to you again next time.